Warning, this show may contain biased opinions regarding the Southeastern Conference, and in particular, the University of Florida. College football fans that don't meet these criteria are cautioned, for this program may show outrageous and extreme takes.
Welcome everybody to a new episode of the College Football History Channel, where for every Friday of the 2021 college football season, I will be picking a specific SEC team and discussing a game or event from a past season that happened on that particular day. This season, I've selected my favorite team, the Florida Gators. If you ever hear Gator bias in my episodes, I do not apologize, and I will do my best to be honest to whatever actually happened during that time period.
Oh my! We got 30 minutes for the rest of our lives! 30 minutes for the rest of our lives!
This week, I'll be discussing a game from the Florida Gators 2011 season. Though this game isn't the most exciting, the transition Florida was going through during this time has changed the face of the Gator football program today. The 2011 season was the first for new Gators coach Will Muschamp. Coach Urban Meyer had recently left the Florida Gators under mysterious circumstances after transforming the program and winning multiple championships. Meyer had turned the Gators into a force to be reckoned with, winning 2 SEC championships and 2 national titles, and creating one of the most dominant college football teams, led by players such as Heisman Trophy winner Tim Tebow, receiver Percy Harvin, and linebacker Brandon Spikes. During his tenure, the Gators were loaded with NFL talent, but also controversial figures. After Tebow left for the NFL at the end of the 2009 season, Gator Nation was left wondering if the Gators would remain an elite team without their star quarterback. Florida had a rough 2010 season, with redshirt junior John Brantley struggling to fit into Meyer's offensive scheme. The Gators ended up going 8-5 that season, Meyer's worst record while at Florida. And by December, Meyer had had enough and stated that he would be leaving the Gators and retiring from football altogether. Urban Meyer's sudden retirement came as a shock to many, with him stating that it was due to health concerns and wanting to spend more time with his family. There's a lot of speculation though on the reasoning for his leaving, since less than a year later, on the following November, it was announced that he would be the next coach for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Rumors started flooding in on who would be the next new coach, with some suspecting that they might hire former Gator offensive coordinator, now Mississippi State head coach Dan Mullen. Some other names thrown in there included Arkansas's Bobby Petrino and even ex-defensive coordinator Charlie Strong. Jeremy Foley ended up selecting Texas defensive coordinator Will Muschamp as the next head coach for the Florida Gators. This was a decision that shocked many of Florida's fans, with this being Muschamp's first head coaching job. Many people were wondering if Florida was setting someone with limited experience up for failure, with the big shoes he had to fill from Urban Meyer. Florida had made a similar move when they hired Ron Zook in 2002, who had also never been a head coach before. After Steve Spurrier decided he was headed to the NFL, Zook took over and struggled at Florida, never being able to turn them into an elite team. He was let go during the 2004 season. Florida fans were hoping that this move would not be a repeat of history from the Zook era. Muschamp was known around college football as an elite defensive coordinator and recruiter who coached with very high energy, being nicknamed Coach Boom for reasons like this.
Safety fence outside. Will's got to be here. Does everybody see that? Gap control. Everybody just do your job. You understand that?
On and throws it away. The pressure came from Antonio Coleman, who was looking for his 4th sack of the year.
And overcome the adversity on the field.
And these were some of the main factors driving Jeremy Foley to pull the trigger on Muschamp. He said, quote, "Coach Muschamp is someone we targeted from the beginning, and he's the guy we wanted. He's the only person we met with and the only person we offered the job to." End quote.
So I don't think it's a gamble. I just think that guy will fit here. He reminds me a lot of Billy. He reminds me a lot of Sully. He reminds me a lot of Urban. So, time will tell. At the end of the day, he's going to win some football games. But I'm very confident that his makeup and his ability to do the things he does, the ability to attract a good staff, I don't think there's anything. Well, I just, ability to fit into this community, on this campus, ability to be a good person, to treat people right, obviously a work ethic, honesty, integrity, experience. I think the fact that he's been on this stage and been in this league is huge. I just know walking into Tuscaloosa and walking into Tiger Stadium, walking into, those places, it's different. It's different than a lot of places around the country. Obviously, he's had great success now. He won a national championship at LSU. Obviously played for the national championship last year. Done some great things against the Gators. I think I saw our record against us is 4-1 or something like that, right? I think he's a big-time coach. So can he put it all together? Can he lead and do all those things? Will there be some bumps in the road? Sure there will be. But I think the guy's a leader, and it was pretty evident. I know there was a lot of concerns about how fast we move, but it's pretty evident when I sit down with him. But this is the guy, and time will tell whether he is the guy or not.
So, Muschamp would be left with the responsibility of maintaining the success that Urban Meyer had created, and he would be met with a few major challenges during the offseason. Early into 2011, Muschamp had pulled together his staff of assistant coaches. At defensive coordinator, he chose Dan Quinn. Quinn had previously coached in the NFL for the past 10 seasons and had worked on the Miami Dolphins staff with Muschamp. At offensive coordinator, he hired ex-Notre Dame head coach and current Kansas City Chief offensive coordinator Charlie Weis. Weis was most famous for winning 3 Super Bowls with the Patriots as their offensive coordinator at the beginning of Tom Brady's career. With his staff assembled, Muschamp's next job was to get his team together. With many of Meyer's offensive threats going to the NFL, the Gators' offense at this time was all over the place. In regards to the quarterbacks, Muschamp had made it seem to most reporters that the QB position was going to be an open competition. But with redshirt senior John Brantley on the roster, who was a former Gatorade National Player of the Year in 2006, there was an obvious favorite to play quarterback. Having a difficult time in Meyer's spread attack offense, Muschamp was hoping that with the help of Charlie Weis, they could turn Brantley's performance around into their pro-style offense that they would be implementing. A year prior, Brantley had thrown for 2,061 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions to become the first UF player since Kyle Morris in 1988 to throw more interceptions than touchdowns in a season. By the time Florida's spring game was played in April, fans and media could still tell that the Gators were going to have a big problem on their hands at the quarterback position. An article from the Florida Times-Union stated that John Brantley didn't look any different in this new offensive scheme than he did under Steve Adazio's a year prior. He had only gone 4 for 14 and threw for 45 yards total in 2 quarters. Behind Brantley would be new quarterbacks Jeff Driscoll, Jacoby Brissett, and Tyler Murphy. And just so Gator fans could get mad for a second, all 3 of those quarterbacks ended up making it into the NFL after transferring to different schools. Florida also had to replace 4 senior offensive linemen. And because of injuries, something Muschamp would later have to deal with his entire career at Florida, he only had 7 healthy offensive linemen available by Florida's spring game. They were also weak at the receiver position. They had their leading receiver from a year prior back in Deontay Thompson, but they lacked depth and would need others to step up their game if they're going to be any sort of threat this season. They were hoping that some of their players, such as Quentin Dunbar, Andre DeBose, or Frankie Hammond Jr., would take charge. At tight end, they're going to be transitioning Jordan Reed, who had played a little bit of quarterback the season before, into the role. He told the Tampa Bay Times, quote, "I chose to be the tight end. They asked me which one I wanted to play, and I told them I'd rather play tight end. I just felt like I could go farther playing tight end than quarterback," end quote.
No, I never played tight end before.
How does it feel to you now, though?
I like it. I like running around and stuff, banging with the DNs a little bit, so it's pretty good.
Do you think he helped more earlier in this position than he would have at quarterback?
I'm not sure. I'm just trying to get better every day. Whenever they feel I'm ready, is when they put me in.
What's the biggest challenge in making change?
Blocking.
The one part of the offense that Florida was hoping to be strong at was running back. They were going into the season with returning backs Jeff Demps, Chris Rainey, and Mike Gillisley. There ended up being a lot of issues in the offseason with the running backs as well. Jeff Demps, arguably the fastest player in college football, would be missing spring ball because he was heavily focused on outdoor track at the time. Demps still is the only athlete at the University of Florida to win a national championship in 2 different sports. Not only that, but there were also major questions with him returning to football at all. In July, he was in Italy, competing for a spot on the U.S. national track team. Luckily for Muschamp, Demps had failed to make the finals in the 2011 championships and would be returning in time for fall camp to begin. Demps would also be changing his number from 2 to 28. His reason for the change was simple, quote, "I just wanted a running back's number," end quote. Due to injuries, the only returning running back on the roster for the spring would be senior Chris Rainey, who was also dealing with his own issues. Rainey had been arrested in the middle of the 2010 season and had been charged with aggravated stalking, which was a 3rd-degree felony. He had shown up to his girlfriend at the time's house, threatening her and trying to break in. He also sent her threatening text messages, with the most famous one being, "Time to die." He was also kicked off the team and then reinstated 4 games later after pleading guilty to a misdemeanor stalking charge. Now, I have absolutely no evidence to back this up, but I'd like to point out that Rainey had to leave the game he played in on the Saturday before the arrest at halftime due to a concussion. I find that interesting, but like I said, I have no evidence to conclude that it played a factor. Rainey would also be going through a number change, going from number 3 to number 1. His reasoning was a little different than Demp's with, quote, God's first, family's first, me's first, end quote. I'm not gonna lie, I have no idea what that means, but I love it. Rainey was back though, and trying to make things right, and was very much looking forward to being one of the key players on the offense this season. The last major weapon on Florida's offense would be utility player Trey Burton. Burton at the time didn't really have a position, but he undoubtedly had the ability to make big plays when given the ball. He was also a major glue guy for the team. One article by the Palm Beach Post mentioned how much the players respected his attitude and how he approached the game. When talking about Burton, running back Chris Rainey said, quote, he's a program guy, they call it. He's great. He does everything right. I love him. We need people like that. It's very rare. It would be nice to have a whole team like that, end quote. You can get the same feeling when he speaks to the media too. When he was asked about having to move from position to position, he said, quote, I'm honored to do this. I wouldn't have it any other way. I'd like to play quarterback like I did in high school, but this fits me better and I have fun doing it, end quote. The defense also had some question marks, but they seemed to have much more depth than the offense. Again, this is another trend that happened throughout Muschamp's career. The secondary was going to be full of newer faces with Matt Elam, Deontay Sanders, and Josh Evans at safety. At cornerback, they had players like Jeremy Brown, Marcus Roberson, and Cody Riggs. At linebacker, they had John Bostic, Jelani Jenkins, and Lorente McCray. On the D-line, they would have Ronald Powell, Dominic Easley, Sharif Floyd, and Jay Howard. All of these players would end up playing in the NFL at some capacity, except for Jeremy Brown, who would have to battle through multiple serious injuries during his career. Muschamp did make major headlines though, after he kicked off one of the best players on the team at the time, Janoris Jenkins. Jenkins had been arrested twice for possession of marijuana since Muschamp had arrived. Florida at the time had already been under some heat, and it was reported that under Urban Meyer, the Gators had 31 arrests from 25 players in his 6 years as head coach. Muschamp wanted to bring more of an old school, no-nonsense type of approach to Florida, sort of like his mentor Nick Saban at Alabama. During this offseason, there were signs of Muschamp wanting to take a more old school approach to things. For instance, he would only allow specific people to be able to talk to the media. Freshmen were not allowed to talk to the media, even after big games, and only coordinators could do interviews as well. Muschamp was doing his best to clean up the program, but as we all know, it's statistically proven that the more arrests on your team leads to more championships. The last thing I'd like to mention about the Gators this offseason is about the injury of Gator linebacker Naron Ball, who had missed the season due to being hospitalized after blood vessels in his brain burst that offseason. He would later be diagnosed with arteriovenous malformation, something that happens when a group of blood vessels in your body forms incorrectly. Ball ended up returning for the 2012 season to finish his career out for the Gators, playing well enough to get drafted by the Oakland Raiders in the 5th round of the 2015 NFL Draft. In the late summer of 2018, another blood vessel ruptured in his brain, resulting in a brain aneurysm that forced him to be placed in a medically induced coma. Once out of the coma, he had become a quadriplegic. By the next year, in September 2019, he had passed away. Naron's former head coach, Will Muschamp, said something that seems to resemble how many of his family and peers felt about him at the time. Quote, anybody that came into contact with Naron Ball liked him. I don't know if I could find anyone on earth that did not like Naron Ball. He's just one of those people that just has a certain personality that is just electric with people. It's just really a sad situation. End quote. The Gators kicked off the Muschamp era on September 3rd, 2011 against the FAU Owls, coached by Howard Schnellenberger. Yeah, the same one from the last episode, in his final season as head coach. The game went about as well as you would think against a small school for the first game of the year. The Gators rolled through the Owls, beating them 41-3 at home. It was a huge night for senior Chris Rainey, who scored 3 touchdowns in 3 different ways. The first one was from a 14-yard pass from John Brantley. The second, a 14-yard rushing touchdown a few drives later. And then, he finished his night returning a blocked punt from Solomon Patton for his 3rd touchdown. Rainey had been the first player in college football since 1996 to score a touchdown in 3 different ways in a single game. The game was a precursor for what the rest of the season would look like, with Chris Rainey and Jeff Demps being productive, and members like John Brantley at quarterback not. John Brantley didn't have the worst game, but also didn't have the best game of his career. He ended up going 21 for 30, throwing for 229 yards and 1 touchdown, but also throwing 2 interceptions. One quote that I find particularly funny was by Rainey the next week after the game. When asked about the game plan, he said, quote, "We only did like 6 plays. That's it," end quote. Charlie Weiss then responded to this statement by saying, quote, "For Rainey to try to give you analysis of what we're doing, that's comical." For him, there was 6 plays that had number 1 attached to it, so as far as he was concerned, there were only 6 plays that existed. He forgot about all those other ones that number 1 wasn't getting the ball, end quote. UAB was coming into the season looking to build off of a somewhat disappointing season a year prior. They had gone 4-8 with some close losses to some SEC schools like Tennessee and Mississippi State. They were projected to have one of the better offenses in their conference, but with one of the worst defenses in their conference, they were unable to find much success. This was going to be head coach's Neil Callaway's 5th season as head coach, and to say he was on the hot seat was an understatement. To begin with, him getting hired as the head coach was sort of a controversial topic at the time. UAB was rumored to have offered the head coaching job to 2 other candidates before Callaway. One was Pat Sullivan, the UAB offensive coordinator that season, and the other was Jimbo Fisher. Some believe that the University of Alabama Board of Trustees vetoed the contract offers due to the possibility of these coaches having the potential to coach at the University of Alabama, and in order to keep the program in a lower status than Bama. I have honestly never heard of something like that happening before, so it seems pretty crazy to me that Bama could possibly just deny coaches from going to other schools in Alabama. Either way, Callaway was eventually chosen and not having much success in the role. Going into this season, his record as head coach was 15-33. Some notable players going into this season for UAB included senior quarterback Brian Ellis, who was coming off of a nice season the year before, throwing for 25 touchdowns and 2,940 passing yards, and starting running back Pat Shedd, a former JUCO player from EMCC, Go Lions, who had 847 rushing yards, 471 receiving yards, and 7 total touchdowns in 2010. They also had left tackle Matt McCants, returning along with most of their O-line. He was a first-team All-Conference USA player in 2010. He would eventually play a few seasons in the NFL. UAB would be entering the game down some key players, with running back Pat Shedd, defensive tackle Elliott Hennigan, and cornerback TJ Fallu. All 3 players were out with hernias, which seems like an odd coincidence to me. On the opening kickoff, Andre DeBose ran for a 50-yard gain, giving one of his many electric kick returns in his career. John Brantley then threw a 40-yard flea flicker to receiver Quentin Dunbar, getting the Gators into the red zone. The Gators were unable to punch it in for a touchdown and settled for a 24-yard field goal to make the score 3-0. The Gators failed to score on their next drive as well. Rainey had gains around 40 yards, both on the ground and through the air. Demps had to leave midway through the drive and didn't return for the rest of the game due to a shoulder injury. He would end up returning a week later against Tennessee. They had to kick another field goal on this drive, with Sturgis making his 2nd of the night to go up 6-0. UAB then went 3-and-out, leading to the Gators' first touchdown of the night. Brantley made some key passes to DeBose, Rainey, and Deontay Thompson to set up a rushing touchdown for fullback Hunter Joyer to take a 13-0 lead. That carry also happened to be his first carry of his college career. On a later drive, Sturgis made another field goal with 4:10 left in the second quarter to make the game 16-0. UAB added insult to injury on the next drive after their long snapper snapped the ball over Trey Ragland's hands, with the ball going out of the back of the end zone for a safety. Gators now up 18-0. Florida ended the half by driving down the field and going up 25-0 with a 5-yard rushing touchdown made by Trey Burton. UAB started the second half with a fumble forced by safety Matt Elam that was recovered by Florida cornerback Marcus Roberson. The Gators drove down the field again and scored on a 19-yard rush from running back Chris Rainey. They were now leading 32-0. On the next drive, the Blazers attempted a fake punt on 4th down, but was stopped by Florida. 3 plays later, they scored again on a 13-yard run by the Gators' Mike Gillisley, now up 39-0. They spent the remainder of the game playing backups and running out the clock to end the game. John Brantley ended the game throwing 12 for 19 for 195 yards and 0 touchdowns. Another subpar performance. With Jeff Demps getting injured early, Chris Rainey took the bulk of the carries, running for 119 yards on 16 carries with a touchdown. Florida recorded their first shutout since 2006, only allowing UAB's offense to gain 212 yards. UAB's quarterback had a rough day, only going 15 for 28 with 141 yards. UAB ended up not having the best season, finishing 3-9 and going through multiple quarterbacks throughout the season. Coach Neil Callaway was let go at the end of the season after going 18-42 all-time with UAB. Florida ended up finishing the season 7-6, winning the Tax Slayer Gator Bowl 24-17 against Ohio State to avoid a losing season. Brantley ended up having a similar season to the one he had a year prior, throwing just over 2,000 yards and for 11 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. He was never able to play up to the hype fans were hoping for from a Gatorade National Player of the Year. Chris Rainey would go on to get drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers and ended up playing a couple seasons in the NFL. He's actually still playing today in 2021 in the Canadian Football League. Jeff Demps skipped that season's draft to run in the 2012 Olympics, where he was an alternate and was able to race in one of the preliminary rounds to help the United States 4x100 meter relay team advance to the final round. They would go on to win a silver medal, and he would eventually join the New England Patriots roster and play in the NFL for a couple seasons. Will Muschamp led the Gators to the Sugar Bowl the next season, only losing one game in the regular season and creating a ton of buzz around the program, only to have it all come crashing down in 2013. They had their worst record in decades and only went 7-5 the next season, playing with some of the best defenses, but also worst offenses you've ever seen. Since then, the Gators have been left trying to recover from the loss of Urban Meyer. They show glimpses of hope at times, but ultimately, they can't make the final push to be elite. There is a great quote from a reporter for the 2011 season that I think still holds true today and is what Florida is missing since the Urban Meyer era. Quote, "Florida is young and largely inexperienced. It will take time for this group to find its identity and, most important, special leaders. I'm not talking about a locker room cheerleader, but athletes who consistently execute plays. What sets the SEC apart from its competitors is simple: superstars. In a league in which every team is stocked with talent, one or two special players can be the difference between 11-1 or 7-5. End quote. Thank you for watching this episode. Please make sure to like, subscribe, or comment. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter in the links below. I will see you next time on the College Football History Channel.